One of last season's pleasant surprises was the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it was for a multitude of reasons that most neutral observers and even Cavs fans themselves could not foresee coming. The team was projected to be somewhere between being at the bottom of the league to fighting for a spot in the play-in tournament. Here's a clip of a preseason podcast I did before the start of last season with my good homie Evan Damerel, who covers the Cavaliers and is the co-host of the Locked On Cavs podcast. Do the Cavs make the play-in? No?
No. And here's my argument, because I have a list pulled up in front of me.
The Cavs, it's not a... I can't see the Cavs making the play-in either. Another thing we got wrong in that podcast was the projected starting lineup. After trading for Lauri Markkanen and giving him a contract extension, many thought Evan Mobley, who the team drafted third overall just a few months prior, would come along slowly off the bench. Instead, head coach JB Bickerstaff revealed that he was going to start Mobley, Markkanen, and Jarrett Allen all together. And let's be real, 99.9% of us thought that was nuts. But after a 7-4 start, it proved to be something that could work. Evan Mobley immediately stamped himself into the Rookie of the Year race, and throughout the year, he was one of two rookies, shout out Herb Jones, to have at the very least a fringe case for a spot on one of the All-NBA defensive teams. Jarrett Allen took his game to all-star levels, and Markkanen provided spacing and was insulated by the defensive brilliance of Allen and Mobley. Darius Garland also took a leap from a good second year to an all-star. Kevin Love was finally healthy for the first time in a long time and made an impact off the bench, and I had him third on my theoretical 6th Man of the Year ballot. With all those factors, the Cavs formed into a good team and became one of the best defenses in the NBA, and were not just in the play-in conversation, but the playoff conversation full stop. At the end of January, the Cavs were 31-20, the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, and had a chance to climb even higher. Unfortunately, a little regression, the Ricky Rubio ACL tear catching up to them offensively, implementing players via trade, and other Eastern Conference teams like the Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks finding themselves, moved the Cavs down the standings. Then injuries started mounting up late in the year to key Cavs players. Jarrett Allen broke his finger, Evan Mobley hurt his ankle, Garland was playing through a back injury, Caris LeVert missed some time after the Cavs traded for him, and after that 31-20 start, the Cavs closed out the season 13-18 and lost back-to-back play-in games against the Nets and the Hawks at home. But with that roller coaster, it was still a season that exceeded and crushed expectations. Now, fans will probably have a more stressful time this season, with increased expectations coming off of a feel-good season. When fully healthy, the Cavs played a sizable amount of games that proved they can compete with a lot of good teams, and formed an identity on defense. With some moves on the margins and a draft pick that addressed a need for more two-way players at the wing position, the Cavs are looking to recapture their footing and build towards holding on to a playoff spot in the East this time around. The Cavs did at least try to address some needs, especially made moves on the margins this offseason. One, bringing back Ricky Rubio. After he tore his ACL, the Cavs used him in a trade, used his expiring deal in the Caris LeVert trade, and now Ricky Rubio is back with the Cavs on a 3-year deal. He's probably going to be recovering from his ACL for most of this season, I'd imagine, which makes the Raul Neto signing this offseason even more important. Whenever Darius Garland played in the backcourt with another guard, the offense was usually good. Raul Neto had a couple of good seasons with the Wizards, and I imagine he's going to play an important role as Ricky Rubio also recovers from his ACL, but also providing some guard-to-guard backcourt play along with Garland. And then sticking with, having a stockpile of bigs, they also signed Robin Lopez, who probably won't play that much, but is also just a veteran that knows what he's doing, will provide at least 10 to 15 good minutes on a good day with a lot of fouls as well, keeps the Cavs' integrity and identity playing three bigs intact. And then, of course, in the draft, they drafted Ochai Agbaji, which was kind of the no-brainer. Everybody had Agbaji mocked to the Cavs in some way, shape, or form in the mock drafts. Now they get him, the wing out of Kansas, somebody who is projected to be a 3-and-D player that is going to play or contribute immediately. At least those are the expectations. He's a really good shooter in all types of situations. And like I said, addresses the Cavs' need to add more two-way wings, and then they drafted Evan Mobley's older brother, Isaiah Mobley, and I don't know how much he's going to play. I imagine he'll probably have a few stints in the G League, but keeping the integrity of having multiple bigs to play your 3 big lineups, but also addressing the need of having bigger wings, bigger 3 and D wings. The Cavs did make a lot of marginal moves, but they're moves that should incrementally improve the team and also keep the integrity and core of their identity. And with some offensive improvements from Evan Mobley, another leap from Darius Garland in some way, shape, or form, and Jarrett Allen getting better. Remember, this Cavs core is still really young too. They really did address some needs, and they were already a good team when healthy. And if I had to give a grade on the Cavs offseason, I would give it a solid B. So with Abachi now in the fold for the Cavaliers, it seems like they have a couple of more options in terms of bigger two-way wings. Isaac Okoro, of course, started in a lot of games last year, but this is where the Cavs' unexpected rise might have actually hindered Okoro a little bit, because he was not a great offensive player coming out of Auburn. We all knew he needed a lot of work offensively, and that still hasn't really come to fruition. As you saw in the Nets playing game, the Nets basically ignored him, and the Cavs made an adjustment and inserted LeVert into the starting lineup, theoretically to have another shot creator, somebody who can get to the rack a little bit more, somebody who can, at the very least, kick it out once he gets into the teeth of the defense in the paint. But it highlighted just that the timeline has now been sped up for Okoro. He's going to be eligible for an extension this upcoming offseason, not this past one, but the next one. And that could complicate things, because I believe LeVert is also eligible for an extension this upcoming summer. And this is kind of the make or break year for Isaac Okoro in terms of, do we see a meaningful step in his offensive development? He did improve a little bit shooting the ball from 3 from his rookie year to this past year, but the volume still isn't there. He really can't take more than 3 dribbles without it being an adventure. He is effective in terms of transition. He's great at filling the lanes. He's athletic. He can attack the rack once you get him going downhill in transition. But in the half court, teams are still going to ignore him, and they're not going to be worried about him really creating anything off the dribble. And with a 3 big lineup, having more shot creators from the perimeter is very important, which is probably why the Cavs did the trade. I got it theoretically. Having a 3 big lineup still inherently cramps the spacing a little bit offensively. They need a secondary creator to help out Darius Garland, which is why the Ricky Rubio and Darius Garland 2-man lineups were so effective, because Garland could play off the ball, etc. But this is a make or break year for Okoro in terms of trying to take the next step. He's been a solid corner 3-point shooter. He increased his volume and is still the same percentage, but at least there is some hope for development there. But like I said, he's going to have to really make some meaningful steps, especially because the Cavs now have their big 3 established, and it's all about putting players around that big 3 that can help fill in the blanks and fit around their best players. And another reason it might be a time crunch for Okoro is because the Cavs drafted Ochai Abachi, who is probably already a better offensive player than Okoro, just in terms of the skills he can provide to help grease the wheels on the Cavs offense. He's a good shooter. He could shoot in any type of situation, and he also is a really good defender. Now, you can argue, obviously Okoro's clearly the better defender right now. Abachi hasn't played a single NBA game, but we've seen in the playoffs and in the regular season, big regular season games over and over again, that you can be elite on one end of the floor, but if it's one end of the floor you need to be elite at, it's offense. Usually elite defenders have to do something on the offensive end. They have to provide two-way impact in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't necessarily have to be shot creation, but you have to provide some skills on the offensive end. And Okoro hasn't really shown that yet. So this is going to be a 3-man wing rotation, obviously, as I imagine. It's going to be interesting. It sounds like LeVert might be the starter going into this season, and I think it might be the correct move, because The Cavs need to find some way to generate easier offense, but with Abachi already under the fold now, the clock is ticking on Isaac Okoro, and if he doesn't make any meaningful steps, the Cavs already have 2 options waiting in the wings to fill in the gap. Now let's move on to the crux of this Cavs team, which is very intriguing. The Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen trio. The Cavs were able to get in on the first James Harden trade, which was the 4-team deal, and the Cavs were able to poach away Jarrett Allen from the Nets. He was already a really good player, but he became an all-star this year. I thought he improved as a short roll passer. Him and Evan Mobley had a nice connection in terms of the high-low 2-man game. Evan Mobley showed good flashes of being a passer, but Jarrett Allen's passing in terms of on the short roll and in tight spaces, tight congested spaces in the paint, really was key in terms of making this configured roster work. And also him and Darius Garland, immediate chemistry in the pick and roll, an elite defender, elite rim protector, one of the best posterized blockers I've ever watched, and also is really good at defending the perimeter, and that is the secret sauce with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. They can both defend the perimeter as 2 7-footers, and Evan Mobley, my God, like, he jumped off the page immediately. Like I said earlier in the video, he had a fringe case to make an all-defensive team. That's how good he was. Now it's all about taking the next steps, improvement in terms of the offensive game. He's just a very smart player already and is elite on one end of the floor already, while showing very awesome flashes on the offensive end. And I don't even think Evan Mobley just might be one of those players that's like a top 10 to 15 player and doesn't even need to average like 28 points a game. He could just be an elite offensive player just by being an awesome passer, a very efficient finisher around the rim, really good shooter. I just really love the future for this team. And then you top it off with having a point guard like Darius Garland, who has made every step you want, you know, your franchise point guard to make since he's entered the league, becoming an awesome playmaker, a deep range 3-point shooter. His floater game is absolutely disgusting. His in-between game is elite too, and he's also not only had chemistry with Jarrett Allen in terms of the pick and roll, he also has chemistry with Evan Mobley. He already developed immediate chemistry with Evan Mobley in the pick and roll, or finding Evan Mobley or Jarrett Allen in the dunker spot when Garland would get to the lane. Garland and Trae Young have this thing in their float game where you cannot tell if it's going to be a floater or if it's going to be a pass, and that is a very dangerous weapon that we saw him use repeatedly this past season. And with the fact that Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley can cover so much ground as 7-foot centers that can defend the perimeter and protect the rim, it really insulates Darius Garland and his shortcomings on the defensive end, being a smaller guard. And then, of course, covering for Lauri Markkanen too. And Lauri Markkanen's length does add some positives in terms of defense. He's not the best defender in the world. He's definitely, I would class him as below average, but he's big, he's long, he definitely competes. And with Markkanen spacing, that helps the offense be cleaner a little bit, fitting in 3 bigs together. That's why whenever Lauri Markkanen was out in the early part of last season, Dean Wade came in and filled the gaps in terms of spacing and still allowed the 3 big configuration to work. I'm just really excited about this big 3 because it's size, but it's more so versatile skill sets, and all of these guys' skill sets fit well together. Just any type of lineup with these 3 guys on the court together, it was a positive. But overall, the offense could still use improvement, and I do think there are pathways to improve the offense. If they have a little bit more luck in terms of health, they'll be able to play more 2-guard lineups like, you know, Darius Garland and Ricky Rubio were so effective last year before Rubio tore his ACL. With LeVert in the fold coming up for this training camp, maybe the synergy will click between Garland and LeVert, and you have 2 offensive creators who can get to the rim, can do different things offensively. The Cavs' offensive rating overall was 19th, which is not good, but because they were so good defensively and already formed a team identity and a chemistry among their best players, they were able to stay in the thick of the race. This offensive rating was up until January 31st. After that, they got worse in terms of offensive rating, but that was expected because then that's when injuries to key players started happening. There are just ways for them to generate cleaner looks. Ochai Agbaji, for example, is probably the one guy the Cavs haven't had in terms of somebody who has movement shooting and you could call a play for just to get an open look. Cedi Osman was probably their best guy in terms of doing that last year, but now Agbaji can do that and also can provide a lot defensively. They signed Raul Neto, which, for the time being, Raul Neto is probably going to be the backup. And then once Ricky Rubio gets healthy, then boom, you have the effective two-man lineup that did so much damage for you last year. And if you get some, incremental offensive improvements from Evan Mobley, I think the Cavs can move up a bit in terms of the offensive rating rankings. And so now we come to the big question, the Eastern Conference hierarchy. Now with Kevin Durant looking like he's going to stay in Brooklyn, yes, I know Brooklyn does look nice on paper, but I'm just not going to ignore the fact that Kevin fucking Durant is still a Brooklyn Net. So the Nets are back in the mix. I'm sorry, they just are. They are back in the mix in the Eastern Conference. When you have Kevin fucking Durant on your team, you're a contender. The 5 Eastern Conference teams, obviously, you got Boston, Milwaukee. They are in the contender crust in terms of tiers. They are the 2 contenders. And then the Sixers and the Heat, I have them as right on the doorstep of contendership along with the Brooklyn Nets. So that's 5 already. And when you look at those 5 teams, it just tells you how loaded the East is, because you got the Toronto Raptors, you got the Cavaliers. If the Bulls get Lonzo Ball back healthy, please Lonzo Ball be healthy. Hopefully that knee isn't a big issue, but they can compete for a lower playoff seed or a play-in seed. You got the Atlanta Hawks and the DeJounte Murray trade. Where do the Cavs rank among those? I have the Cavs firmly 6th in the Eastern Conference. I am so bullish on them after what they showed me when healthy, after that 31-20 start. I really think that with another year together, this young core is going to improve together. Now, there is the valid case that they are no longer going to be the hunters. They're going to be the hunted somewhat. They're not going to sneak up on teams anymore. And this is the part where expectations rise, and this is where the not so fun part of being a sports fan happens, is when your team has expectations and every game you're just hanging your fanhood on the balance of that 1 out of 82 games in the season. The Cavs are definitely not going to sneak up on teams anymore, but I still have the Cavs pegged in as a 6th seed, which means they are just out of play-in range and are firmly a playoff team. I think they have an identity already. I think they have a rising star in terms of Darius Garland, a rising star in terms of Evan Mobley. Jarrett Allen, he's already an awesome player, and he could also take leaps offensively, incremental steps in his game. I just really like this Cavs team, and if they get like 10% better injury luck, improvements from their 3 best players who are really young, the wing position sorts itself out. Ochai Agbaji contributes right away. Karis LeVert kind of reverts back to his Brooklyn form a little bit. If 60% of the things break right for the Cavs in the regular season, they're going to be a lock for a playoff spot, in my opinion.